tables, a whole bunch of people sitting on it. And all of a sudden, I didn't realize this, they gave out a huge award. And it's called the Tim Burke Pioneer Award. And our friend and local genius and pillar of our community, Steve Rafferty, received that award. Can you believe that? So welcome the CEO of Active CrossFit and our friend, Steve Rafferty. We're super grateful that you come on here and be with us on the podcast.
All right, thanks guys, happy to be here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have questions for you.
All right.
And the first question I have for you, Steve, is you work with a lot of really established companies, been around for a long time, seen the good, the bad, the ugly with it. When it comes to like lead scoring, kind of as we go down the funnel, right? Justin was top of funnel. You're going to get those leads, but like really make something out of them. What are they doing in terms of like lead scoring? What's the best practices that are out there for it?
All right. Well, I'm going to answer your question, get into lead scoring, but I'm going to take a step back first.
Okay.
If we're talking about a lead buyer, what they're doing, I think lead scoring, in my opinion, is still a relatively advanced thing. When I think of lead scoring, I'm thinking using a predictive model to assign a score that's really associated with the probability that this lead is going to become a customer, right? But I think a lot of folks miss out on the basics even before getting into things like lead scoring. So you get a lead, thank you, Justin, for background on generating leads. You get this lead, and there's a good chance, hopefully, that's going to turn into a customer. But some of those leads that you receive are just not going to be a customer, ever. There's no chance. Zero. Worst case, some of those leads you buy will get you sued, right? And that's even worse, right? You go out, you make this investment, you buy a lead, you generate a lead, and lo and behold, you could end up in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And it's fitting that we're on the Troutman and Mean stage. Eric Troutman has done a phenomenal job in really educating the industry about some of the risks associated with leads. So the way I think about it is when you get this lead that you're trying to determine if you can turn into a customer, you first have to filter the stuff out that you know you don't want, right? There's some leads that you're not going to be able to convert. So I'll give you some examples of that. So if you can't contact it, phone number's bad, never going to convert that lead. Or if it's a dupe, let's say it's a lead that you just bought from someone else the day before, or it's an existing customer. You can't close the same lead twice, right? So that's one that you're not going to be able to close. And then maybe it just doesn't meet your criteria at all, right? Every industry, and we're fortunate we work across all industries, but all the different industries have different criteria that they look at for leads. So like if you're in the debt space, you might be looking at how much credit card debt do they have, right? The debt relief. If they don't have the right amount, it's never going to fit as a customer. So those are the types of leads you want to identify up front as soon as possible, and you don't want those leads going into your sales process. You don't want to be working those leads. And then the really risky ones that we worry about the most are the ones where maybe you don't have consent. Now we have this one-to-one requirement. You don't have one-to-one consent. You're using regulated technology. That can be problematic. Could be that it's a serial litigator that filled out the form. Don't want to call them. Or an area that we're really worried about is fraud. There's a lot of bots out there filling out forms. So what the bots are doing is they'll get real contact information, real consumers, and use a bot to fill out the form. Right? That is a consumer that's not expecting your call. That's a consumer that will likely sue you. So those are all the sort of the high-risk leads. So I wanted to give that preface because those are things, we're very focused on creating an efficient acquisition process, right? And so those are leads you want to filter out up front, identify up front, and then you have the remaining leads, the ones that you can potentially close. That's where it's important to score those, figure out which ones are most likely to turn into a customer, and try and focus your efforts on the ones that have the attributes that are most appealing for you. And I'm excited to hear Cameron speak more about that in a second.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is do the work you need to do to get the bad leads out. Don't chew up your agent. And part of the problem too is you send bad leads into your agent, you beat them up over time, create a bad experience. Worst case scenario, you get sued. Like, go to that extra effort to make sure it's all lined up proper. You talked about one-to-one consent. What are you seeing out there in terms of what are some of the smart strategies companies are using to get ready for it?
Yeah, well, on the scoring, let me tie back to the original question.
Okay.
So with the scoring, I think the people the more sophisticated buyers that do it really well use it to inform their bidding. right? In some verticals, you can buy leads in an auction model, ping post model, and you can use that score to influence or drive the bid price that you pay for a lead, right? So generally speaking, pay more for the leads that are most desirable, pay less for the ones that are less desirable. And it's really fascinating for me right now in the new environment that's happening that these strategies are going to completely change, right? So the ping post model is going away, right? In the old model, as it exists, well, it still exists for the next 3 weeks. Consumer goes to a form. On that form, there's a marketing partner list, right? That marketing partner lists 1,000 companies. So that lead generator has the opportunity to sell that lead to any of those 1,000 companies. And so if they sell it to one, they don't want it, well, let's sell it to somebody else, right? And so this idea when you're bidding on a lead, you're truly bidding on a lead. If somebody else, if you don't want it, someone else will take it. In the new one-to-one world that we're moving towards, it's a totally different thing because now you're really not bidding on a lead anymore, you're going to be bidding on an ad placement. You're bidding on the right to be presented to that consumer. So that there's a lot of nuances, and we can dig into that if you guys want to. There's a lot of technical challenges associated with that.
When we talked a little bit before the podcast, I had this kind of this dawn of intelligence on it, like, hey, we're actually just going, in some ways we're going back, right? Like a lot of the coach paths used to have dedicated ads and some other things, then they all kind of went away to getting general information and selling it to everybody. Well, now I would go back to, at least in part, dedicated ads along that path and making it a little bit better of a consumer.
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny when we're talking about that because it is true. I think the old reg path model is coming back, and what we mean by that is this idea that the consumer is going to be presented individual brands where they give explicit consent for those individual brands, and that's that. They either agree or they do not. But the idea is to give that consumer a lot more control.
I think the big concern, obviously, in the new model, everyone's unclear about. And we talked this morning on the main stage when we kicked it off about how prepared are people for this change that's happening, like you mentioned, in 3 weeks. And there's so many unknowns. I think a lot of it's like unit economics. Like, how is this going to affect where you can only sell a lead once or twice to a direct brand? What's the cost for that to take place? And then what's the monetization opportunity? And what can companies really bear to pay, right? There's like, what can they afford in that whole mix based on their product, cost of goods and their average tickets. So it's interesting to consider. But I want to say congrats to Steve for really being ahead on this as much as they have with Active Prospect. I've seen them putting out a lot of information about this ever since they started talking about it last March or April, I think it was. And, you guys have really been...
Yeah, it was actually, it's funny, it's been over a year now since this was announced. Here we are, a few weeks out, and people are finally scrambling to make some changes. But we originally put out some content in December of last year about a process called ping post. So we said, hey, ping post is going away, right? But it's going to change. It's not going to completely go away. The idea of when people talk about ping post, the idea of the ping is there to figure out who the best buyer is, right? It's a matching process. The website wants to maximize their revenue, right? And so they want to sell that lead to whoever's going to spend the most on that particular lead, whoever really values that consumer.
When you say the best buyer for it, it's the buyer that's paying the most, not necessarily the buyer that the consumer. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's a good. In the current model, it's whoever's paying the most is who's going to get that lead for sure. So when I say best, maybe not necessarily the best for the consumer. So good call out. And but that's a good segue though as well. In this new model, there has to be an added step that we call the pick, where the consumer. What I mean by that is that's the point where the consumer gets presented these different options. Maybe it's one, maybe it's 3, 4, 5, however many advertisers the publisher decides to display to that consumer. Now the consumer has control to decide who they're going to choose. Right? Who do they want to get their data to? And it creates some interesting dynamics, like Justin mentioned. if you're a small mortgage lender and you're going up against Home Depot or Wells Fargo or Rocket or one of these really well-known brand names, that can be, I think, a challenge and an opportunity. So the challenge is you're probably going to have to pay more, right? You're going to have to pay more for the right to get in front of that consumer because you're a lesser-known brand. But the opportunity is, man, what a great branding experience. Like you've got this high-intent consumer who's shopping for a mortgage, and your brand is getting presented to that consumer, whether they choose you or not. You are getting that branding opportunity, which is incredibly valuable.
What percent of our, well, maybe that's not the right way to phrase this. Do you think people are ready for one-to-one consent genuinely? How many companies out there are ready for it? And if they're not, what do they do? Like, if they're panicking right now, like, what do I actually do about it? What advice do you have?
Yeah, the short answer is no. I really don't think people are ready at this stage. And the reason I say that, I think there's been a lot of work done, but I think people are really scrambling now. They're adjusting their process to get one-to-one consent. But if you're a lead buyer, you need to make sure you have a way to verify in real time before you call that lead whether you have one-to-one consent. Right? For Trusted Forum, we provide a way. You have a session replay. You can go watch those if you want to, but it's not realistic to go watch these things for every single lead. You have to check programmatically. And so if you really are ready for one-to-one consent, you need to be checking, right? You have to check to make sure you've got one-to-one consent. And I think a lot of people aren't ready to do that yet, just from what we're seeing. And then on the flip side, for the publishers, a lot of them are just changing their process. And it's been a really tough year for lead vendors having to completely change their business model for this new rule. And there's still things that need to be done, like tagging the advertiser name so that people can actually check programmatically if they have one-to-one consent. So there's still a lot of I think work to be done.
Yeah, like I said, we had a nice conversation on Friday and talked about some of these. What you just said, like, it really clicked for me. I didn't realize how important that would be, because there's a certain level of trust that has to exist between the lead buyer and the lead seller. But at the same time, like, that level of trust needs to be verified in all kinds of ways. And having a trusted forum on it's important. Being able to view that video, but actually having something programmed in where your system's telling my system, hey, this is working, this is right, I can attest to it. It's really, really important because, yeah, sure, trust but verify has to exist in the industry, and I think that's super important. One of the things that, as you just have talked about, the increase of need to really pay attention to your leads, it's going to cost some more, you have to get creative. You're just going to have to do more with that lead. You're just going to have to be smarter with it. It's going to be more expensive. You're going to have to go out of your way to really make the most of it. And you being an expert in the industry, what have you seen people do to like really do that well in terms of like, hey, I got this lead. What do I do now to really make it count?
Yeah, I think the key here is having a follow-up strategy that matches the types of leads that you're buying, right? And so if you have a really high-intent lead or high-quality lead, then you should have a process that's geared for that type of lead, right? So you want to make sure you have a really high-quality follow-up process because that's a much more expensive lead, and it's worth the investment to have the right follow-up process. And I think a lot of times, people that they're sort of worried about one-to-one and like, oh man, maybe I'm going to pursue some other strategies, whatever. But it's like this is a higher value lead. Yeah, it's probably going to cost you more, but it's going to convert at a higher rate. And so overall, your customer acquisition cost might go down, even though you're spending more per lead. And so I think as long as you have a good process, there's a service like Squeeze, to have a high quality follow-up process to make sure you get those people on the phone and get them closed.
We love getting people on the phone.
Well, we've also noticed that, like, if you give them a really white glove kind of experience, that's what we try to do, that the propensity to buy on the back end's higher. That's what you were saying, right? Like, you get a better quality lead, give them a better experience, propensity to buy on the back end is going to be higher. You just have to trust us. That's the kind of
and with this pick model, you are engaging with the customer in the funnel, like with your brand much earlier. So you need to have a very cohesive strategy from that initial ad to transaction. consistency from your marketing team and your sales operations teams, promotional messaging and things like that are truly white glove and can set your brand apart.
That's right.
Well, great. That was, we really appreciate you hopping in and speaking with us. When you look back at the end of 2025, last question, what do you think the theme of 2025 will be for the lead gen industry?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a year of a lot of change, right? I've been doing this for 20 years, and this is, I think, the biggest change for the industry that I've seen, this move towards a one-to-one consent requirement. I think I would advise people to lean into it. There's a lot of chatter at the show right now saying, oh, well, it's going to be delayed, right? Like, there's people saying maybe it's not going to happen in the next 3 months, maybe it's not going to happen at all. I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen at some point. Maybe it gets delayed, but at the end of the day, put your consumer hat on. Consumers want control over who contacts them, and the regulators are going to give them that control eventually. It might take a little while, but they'll get it. And so I just advise people to lean into it. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity. These are going to be higher quality leads. They're going to have higher intent, higher close rates, and it might be more expensive, but I think it's a really good opportunity to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think it's good for the most part. The thing that we need to make sure that is controlled is the power that's given to the professional litigators and plaintiffs. That's what I'm concerned. Is like we don't want to encourage more activity in that area, right? With these rule changes, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Well, thanks so much, Steve, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And we'll have you back up for questions in about 20 minutes.
All right, sounds good.